There's a convergence of faith and entertainment. Well, President Bola Tinubu last Friday actually did replace his service chiefs, and of course they tweaked the security hierarchy. And we've been joined this morning by Bright Eweka, a security expert, and we'll be taking a look at that singular action of Mr. President. Glad to have you this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Right.
Nice to be here again.
Major General Olufemi Oluyede moved from being the Chief of Army Staff to Chief of Defense Staff to replace General Musa. Then, of course, the Chief of Defense Intelligence was retained. However, the other people were swept off. And, of course, we have other people replacing them, the Naval Chief, the Air Force Chief, and essentially new brooms, new sheriffs in town, really, so to say. But will you describe the action of Mr. President as a typical midterm ritual, which we're used to seeing every 2 years, service chiefs being changed, unlike what happened during the time of late President Muhammadu Buhari, who had his own service chief for 6 years out of the 8 years that he was in government? Or will you say this will be a turning point in the battle against insurgency, kidnapping, Boko Haram, etc.?
Well, thank you again for having me. The truth is that as the chief executive of the nation and commander-in-chief, he's at liberty, empowered by the Constitution to make strategic changes like this. The frequency is a different subject.
Okay.
The motivation is a different subject. Like you rightly observed, the past president, the late Muhammadu Buhari, you rightly observed, ran with his service chief for more than half of his 8-year tenure.
Yeah.
And if you look at the history of presidents before him, you find this culture of settlement, as it were, where in the spirit of nationalism and this concept of rotational leadership, you find different presidents changing their service chiefs or even ministers using these geopolitical arrangements that we have. And unfortunately, we found that this has also crept into the military, where sometimes you observe that appointment is no longer based on seniority or based on competence, but is based on what part of the country you are from. So we have had this, back and forth for some time now.
Nepotism.
Yes, all right. But what is important, however, is whether whoever you appoint to be there understands the objective,
okay,
understands the purpose, understands the mind of the president as far as national security is concerned, as far as dealing with or protecting our sovereignty is concerned, which is actually the primary duty of the military. So I think that is very important. Whether the president did right or did wrong is not subject for debate. He is within his constitutional right and authority to do so. And we cannot tell why he did so. He hasn't said that much. But of course, in recent past, just recent days, there were speculations of, coup, threat of coup, and the rest of that. So it was to be anticipated.
Okay.
That once there is such a threat to national security, there are likely going to be a change in the leadership of our national security agencies. So that may have necessitated this. We don't know yet. But of course, watchers like us understand that there may be pointers, okay, as far as those rumors is concerned. And we hope that this current leadership would understand and appreciate the magnitude of what we're dealing with as a nation and face it squarely and get rid of all these political interferences, get rid of all these activities that distract from their primary focus, and get the job done as quickly as possible. The president is almost done with his first tenure. And if he gets reelected, chances are he will have sufficient time to address the issues that we have. But if not, what happens? So once you are appointed to such positions, understand that the time you have is the time you will give in is the time you have. Or the time you have is all the time you need, right? So if in 6 months' time these service chiefs are asked to go, would they say they had enough time or didn't have enough time? You see that? So in your appointment, you are not told how long you're going to be there. But once you get to the office, you get the ball rolling immediately.
So you should hit the ball rolling almost immediately.
Yes. It means that before you ever get the opportunity to serve, you already have an idea of what you want to do.
Fine, excellent. I like this line of argument, especially when you take a look at the fact that there seems to be some sort of stability,
Yes,
and perhaps continuity. Because what we've seen is Major General Oluwede, who will soon be confirmed as a full star general in the next few days, as soon as it's confirmed by the Senate, moved from being the Chief of Army Staff to Chief of Defense Staff. Then again, very critical, the Chief of Defense Intelligence has also been retained. So there seems to be perhaps some continuity, perhaps some stability, and maybe to use your words rather, they should have their roles
clearly defined and
clearly defined,
right. Yeah.
Since one moved some steps higher. You understand, at least as Chief of Army Staff, it was almost as prominent as the Chief of Defense Staff.
Absolutely.
But now he's a number one, so to say, amongst the service chiefs.
Oh, well, the good thing, like you rightly observed earlier on, is the fact that the Chief of Defense is still there. And that sort of got some of us a bit interested, because usually what you find in past reshuffling is that everybody's just swept away. And that has impeded our work in the front line.
Right.
And especially because of this culture of everybody trying to outdo their predecessor, and you find it in politics as well. And so you just sort of sweep away the reforms of your predecessor, you sweep away their initiatives and try to reestablish yourself and reaffirm your leadership. And that destroys continuity. It destroys stability of operations. It destroys the integrity of intelligence activities. And nature, they say, abhors a vacuum. Okay? If by the time you have totally new people in the system who probably were not part of the previous leadership, by the time they settle down to understand and try to figure out what to do, the gains we have made in whatever activities we have or the various critical missions we have in the field would have diminished. And so now we are trying to get out of inertia, and we're trying to gain momentum, and then they are swept away again. So we have had this challenge for some time. But intelligence is a critical force multiplier when it comes to military missions. A critical force multiplier. That means when we have some form of stability as far as our intelligence management is concerned, and because that is what aids interagency cooperation and effectiveness, when we have some sort of stability and consistency in that regard, chances are we are going to have some measure of success ultimately. And so that is where some of us who are keen watchers of development seem to have found a little bit of a deviation, and a positive one at that. So we are hoping that the Chief of Defense, the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Defense, and the rest of them will work very closely with Chief of Intelligence to ensure that we sustain what we're doing, both as far as dealing with insurgency is concerned, and also supporting our homeland security, working with the various law enforcement agencies. It's very, very, very important.
Okay. Well, our phone lines are actually on the screen, or will soon be displayed on the screen, and you should please feel free to call in and join the conversations. We're actually talking about the change in the security hierarchy last Friday by President Bola Tinubu. Right. Governor Babagana Zulum, that's the governor of Borno State, did say over the weekend that Boko Haram has started using drones. Also, under this present administration, terror organizations have widened their reach to Sokoto, to Niger, and of course Kwara State. Lakurawa, that's a terror group, is holding sway in Sokoto and Kebbi State.
Absolutely.
Well, there's another one called Mahmuda.
They have now moved into Kwara now.
Yes, now moved.
There's this Mahmuda you just mentioned now.
Yes.
That is now also terrorizing Kwara and surrounding states.
Good. Right. What agenda really will you be setting, really, especially for the new service chiefs, taking into cognizance that we thought the battle, well, the soldiers are always saying they're winning the battle. But then some other things, you're also seeing some other things showing that they're not exactly winning the battle. So, thankfully enough, Mr. President has replaced the service chiefs, or he has new service chiefs, right? What agenda will be setting for them?
Well, no matter what we discuss here, really, it has little or no impact as far as the agenda setting is concerned, because I believe that the president already gave them the marching orders. I presume that they have very clear objectives. But you see, we need to understand that the war against insurgency or our counter-insurgency operations is one, but being fought at different fronts, right? The battle, the war is one, but we have several battles. We just talked about...
The war is one,
yes,
but we have several battles.
We have the battle raging in the northeast. We have the battle that has been raging on for the last 12, 18 months in the northwest, and now gradually shifting towards the southwest.
Yes.
It has now encroached into Kwara. It has now encroached into the middle belt, now very close to Kogi. And remember, a few years ago, terror cells were discovered in Kogi and the rest of that. So we have the fight in various fronts. What is important, despite the fact that we have many missions that we're dealing with, is to have an amalgamated, one united strategy that the various frontline commanders, the various operators in these various theaters understand that the objective is one, and that is to eliminate as quickly as possible this threat to our national security. So that being said, it is also important to realize, you mentioned or you made reference to the fact that the terrorists now use technology, drones and all that. And if you look at the development of war around the world, you realize that the use of technology is also a force multiplier. Look at the war between Russia and Ukraine, and how that using AI-enabled drones has given some sort of strategic advantage on both sides. Don't forget, we live in a small world. It's a very connected world.
Yeah.
And the terrorists and the insurgents we're dealing with are also aware of the availability of these resources. And they have money coming in from unorthodox avenues. And the black market is burgeoning and growing. And this is what fuels conflict around the world. That means they have access to these same resources that our military have access to. In fact, in many instances, they have more access to these resources than regular militaries.
Okay.
So what that means is that we have to start thinking, like they say, outside of the box. The war we are dealing with right now is no longer traditional. We have to now include both kinetic and non-kinetic measures to address these issues. We have to start looking at the root causes of this conflict and addressing it. We have to start looking at the political intervention strategy. We have to start looking at addressing what you call root causes, ranging from issues of lack of employment and farmers not able to engage in their farming activities. The internal crisis we have, farmer-header clashes, and some of these crises here and the flashpoints here and there, all of them feed into the overall war, which is insurgency. When people can no longer do their basic things, they can't go to farm, they can't have basic necessities of life, and they are attracted to means of livelihood that are not orthodox, what do you think happens? They easily yield to it. So while we are looking at strategies to deal with some of the conflicts we have here and there, we need to start looking at some of these not so popular approaches, which is mostly non-kinetic, involving civil society approaches, involving alternative dispute resolution approaches, involving social improvement, welfare strategies, all right, to create a disincentive for feeders into the channels that increase our crisis as far as insurgency is concerned. So agenda setting or no agenda setting, we already know what the challenges are. What I expect the various service chiefs to do is to work together.
It's synergy.
Yes, and work with other law enforcement agencies, because the war is not just for the military. Remember, we have to deal with the police, we have to engage our intelligence agencies, we have to engage some of our civil defense forces and all that. You remember the president recently established the Forest Guard. All of that are part of the security infrastructure that should be networked and harnessed to address all of these issues. If we would do that without neglecting any, we will have a concerted approach that will give us a quicker result, much more quicker result.
Okay. You did talk about the funding for these terrorists. Again, perhaps also we may just talk about the funding for our soldiers. At the last count in the 2025 budget, the government had about 4.91 trillion naira dedicated to defense, right, which is a huge chunk of the budget. But let's leave that aside. That will form my next question. But let's take a look at the fact that isn't it high time we had mercenaries or foreign...
we call them private military contractors.
Yes, who probably will help Nigeria to get this right. Because the thing is this, Boko Haram had been in existence for over 2 decades.
Absolutely.
When you had been battling some insurgency for over 2 decades, and instead of that insurgency thinning out, it seems to be widening. Isn't that something for the government to think about?
Well, the truth is that terrorists, well, this has been the issue in many academic circles. Terrorism really don't end. Really, it doesn't end. But that is not something that most people want to hear. But we know for a fact that terrorism does not end. What you find, based on historical data, is that a group may morph into multiple groups. They just split. And then you start having, you mentioned Boko Haram, right? When we talk about terrorism in Nigeria, it was Boko Haram that is the name that comes to mind. But between 2009 and today, we have had nearly 15 different splinter groups. Now, a splinter group may cease to become popular in the media. That doesn't mean it has ended. What simply means is that perhaps the leadership is neutralized, and then the lieutenants just break into several splinter groups and go to different territories and start new work. So terrorism does not end, and that is proven. Now, but what we can do, however, is to do something about and really be serious about our fight against terrorism, and that is to ensure that we have the right funding for our military. There is also the need to ensure that we bring back the discipline of our armed forces. I think that since the advent of democracy, politics seem to have crept into our military. That's my observation. And because of this, when you start having political consideration for a very structured organization or institutions of our nation, it weakens the operational framework. It weakens governance. It weakens accountability. Okay, and that is what we have seen in the recent history of our armed forces. So we need to bring back discipline. The government needs to fund it. You mentioned a figure. What is the percentage of that defense budget to our overall budget? Compare that to other militaries in the world. Let's look at the armor budget of the American government. And what is the percentage of its defense budget? Look at Germany. Look at the United Kingdom. Now, I know it's very easy to say, oh, don't compare us with America, don't compare us. But you have to understand that when government understand that the threat to their national security is real, and then they put actions to words. They add action to words by doing things deliberately. And that means investing in the equipment, investing in the personnel, investing in training, investing in welfare. And then, not just the military now, there are other agencies of government that work alongside the government, that works alongside the military. You have to, the whole 9 yards, the entire value chain of war. Why do you think the President of the United States, President Trump, changed an entire agency of government from, he's no longer Secretary of Defense, he's Secretary of War. Defense is a bit reactive. War is preemptive. We need to start thinking that way. Every time you talk about defense, you are waiting for the enemy to come to your doorstep. When you think about war, you are bringing the fight.
You're taking war to...
That's what we need to start doing. Our approach has been more of reaction rather than proactiveness, rather than leveraging the original purpose of intelligence to advance the cause of our war efforts. So government needs to invest in all of this, okay? And again, like I said, not just the military now, but all the other agencies, the DSS, the police, the NSCDC, and the whole 9 yards, so that we can have a concerted, a unified effort, or one strategy approach that addresses these things for the long term.
So you're not buying the idea of mercenary or private soldiers?
Now there may be a time for that.
Which former President Goodluck Jonathan?
I was going to go there.
Right.
There was a time where we invited some PMCs from South Africa. There was a time we mooted the idea of the Wagner Group, who eventually died, and actually they did come to this country. I have read the book by the gentleman Ellen Barrow, who was the president of that group. I don't want to mention the name, that group. Now, his own account of what happened is not yet in the media. That's not what our government told us. Evidently, not only was it politicized, it was also sabotaged. They did come, and when they did, they made some serious gains, helping our military to really do a lot in the Sambisa forest. But when it became politicized, according to his account, they withdrew. And I'm sure if you research, you hear some news about how that they seem to have gone beyond their brief. And you're talking about this, now I'm not speaking for them, but the histories are there, the records are there. These are people who have done some of these activities in many other conflict zones and made serious gains. Why is ours different? And the man's own personal account was that he was literally chased out because they didn't want an end to terrorism, according to him. And he documented it.
Was chased out by who?
Let's leave that for another day's discussion, all right? Like I said, we don't want to mention names. But
Okay.
if you research, you find all of this. But here is the point. We can, even if we want to do that, we can work with such organizations as a consultant client arrangement, where they provide frontline, guidance and support in terms of training, in terms of how we approach the various threat areas, threat landscapes, and the rest of that. But the thing will be whether we truly want an end to the conflict. Don't forget, all over the world, war is big business. is a massive multi-billion-dollar industry, whether you like it or not. There are people, some have argued, who are not interested in the war as far as terrorism is in Nigeria is concerned, to end. There are industries who do not want conflict.
There are some arguments that some elites don't even want. They are profiting.
That's what I'm telling you. War is big business. Let me give you an example. Those who manufacture war equipment, how will they be in business if there's no conflict? That's just a simple analogy. I mean, if you produce biscuits, it presupposes that somebody needs to eat biscuits for somebody to invest in buying.
Zeribe comes to mind readily.
Yes.
Please go on.
So it's the same thing. If there is no conflict anywhere in the world, the manufacturers will have no supply chain. And so sometimes we are also aware, based on research, that sometimes some of these industries deliberately create conflicts around the world, and then so that they can have markets. And if you cannot have market through government, you can have market through insurgency. And that's what happens. So that, again, that's a subject for another day. But the truth is that if we really want the conflicts to end, there are different approaches we must adopt. We must strengthen our military. We must strengthen our law enforcement. We must have a joint operation sort of synergy between all the agencies, and then we must strengthen our intelligence network. Because the intelligence network is like the fabric that weaves the entire operation together. Once there is a strategic failure in intelligence, every operation collapses, ultimately.
Okay. I did talk about budget the other time. And the defense was allocated 4.91 trillion naira, a huge chunk of Nigeria's 2025 budget anyway.
Do you remember the percentage of the budget it was?
Okay. But whatever percentage...
Because indeed, it's not the amount.
Yes.
You look at the percentage vis-a-vis the overall budget.
But a few times, we've seen soldiers, retired generals now, who have actually have been made to cough out funds stolen while in government. Mm-hmm. Still, we're still talking about this budget not being enough.
Good. Again, remember I told you that in the recent years, it would appear that our military, our armed forces have been politicized, all right? And what that meant, that single word, politicized meant was that all kinds of alien conducts, characters, have now crept into what was once a disciplined institution, all right? And
that again, also meant that they are comfortable, and that's why there has not been really cool.
Of course, somebody has to, for every man or woman that drops on the front line, somebody makes money. For every man or woman or family that is killed or massacred, somebody makes money. It's sad, but that's the reality. War is big business, brother. Big business. And if it's profit, we're talking about human heads, head counts. So again, imagine the leadership. We have leadership of our armed forces that have been alleged to have stolen funds, and we have records too, right? And some of them have been prosecuted, some have gone into some plea bargaining to return some of the stolen funds and all that. Imagine that happening in our armed forces. So that means it is very likely that the allowances that are supposed to be paid to those who are risking their life in the front line are probably not getting to them, or they are getting peanuts rather than what was budgeted. That's a possibility. It is also possible that money voted to acquire equipment that would have aided our work in the various mission areas are probably not getting to them. And what happened is that we now have strategic incompetence of those in the front line. It also means that whatever has been voted to oil the intelligence machines to help operational commanders on the front line is probably not happening. All of that lead to strategic failure in the entire operation. And now when we talk about failure, we're talking about souls lost, soldiers that are killed, equipment that are destroyed, whole armies decimated. We're talking about losses. So if we really want to stop this trouble, want to stop this problem, it has to start from the top to the very last man. And we have to also have the political will to address it. Okay, let's not politicize anything. If you appoint people based on competence, based on experience, people who understand operation, people who understand what it means to really conduct war. You know, I was having a discussion with somebody the other day, and he was giving a feedback as to the experience with they had gone for a UN mission, and he was talking to someone who was supposed to be like a rank and file from another country, and the comment the gentleman made shocked me. He said in Nigeria, we have destroyed our army with big ranks.
With?
Big ranks. That's a statement the gentleman made. I said, what exactly do you mean? He's from another country. He's a soldier. He said, can you imagine? And this is quite sad. He said, can you imagine? Now he was a corporal. Okay? He was in the peacekeeping mission. He was a corporal. He said, can you imagine? I have very senior army officers from Nigeria who don't know how to use a computer. As basic as that. So, what's going on? And there are other things he said I cannot discuss here, but that's just one. So what happens to our various training structure we have in the army? What happens to the opportunity to invest in training our personnel so that they can meet with global standard of law enforcement and defense? What happens to that? So you can see that we have a really structural, systemic issue that needs to be addressed. But if we have the right leadership who understand that money voted for these causes are to be used for them, you find that there will be remarkable progress.
The budget we're talking about now, Nigeria's own is 10% of the entire budget. US is 13 point something percent voted for the military, for security. So are we saying that 10% of that budget is not enough?
Going by what we have to deal with, it may not be enough. Again, we also have to now ensure that these monies, or whatever is voted, is used judiciously. Sometimes it may not be the amount voted. It could be the judicious use of these funds. Where you have 10% voted, but 2% of that 10% has gone to private pockets. We haven't achieved our aim, but the record shows that 10% was voted. How much of those went into equipment? How much of those went into training? How much of those went into salaries and allowances as they were budgeted? How many of those went into paying gratuities and benefit for fallen soldiers and their families? How many of those went into rehabilitating our wounded heroes and warriors? How many of them went into people who need to be reintegrated after suffering life-threatening injuries, reintegrated into the army or reintegrated into society? How many of them went, go into that? We have a veteran group, in fact, very many veteran groups in Nigeria now. They're trying to harmonize it. How much of that budget goes into veteran welfare through these agencies? And who are the people running it? Is there sincerity of purpose? Is there accountability? Is there governance? Are people being is there a way? We have the Freedom of Information Bill and the rest of that, a law. Is there an openness, transparency in the entire process? All of these have to be built into a legal compliance framework that must be sacrosanct as far as our effort to rid our country of insecurity is concerned.
Okay. I have two last questions for you, and I guess we'll just be very fast about it. The first one is former Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Rabo, when he launched his book some weeks ago, did say that the only way to defeat Boko Haram insurgency and wider insecurity in the country is for the political leadership to take ownership of the war. He says it can't be defeated by military force alone.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. You remember I alluded to that fact also. I did say that the war effort is mostly kinetic in nature, but there are non-kinetic approaches to all of these things. And I gave instances, okay? Engaging civil society groups, looking at the causal factors, those those...
He wants the National Assembly, for instance,
Yes.
to declare war, for instance, on Boko Haram and all of those things.
Listen. The National Assembly does not need to declare war. The president has declared war on terrorism and has given the responsibility to end it to the armed forces. I think what he was referring to was what I alluded to a short while ago when I talked about the political will, where through enabling laws, legal frameworks, constitutional frameworks, that is.
Yeah, from the National Assembly.
Yes, that enforces accountability and compliance, transparency, that demands sanctions for default or deviation from the norm as far as our war effort is concerned. And so that institutional framework needs to be strengthened. Perhaps that's where he's referring to the political class. It is not the senators that's going to go to the front line. But the man who is in the front line is fighting for what purpose? It is
senators that will bring out some laws. That's exactly what he was talking about.
We have to have the law.
Right.
We have to have the mechanism to enforce the law. We also have to have the mechanism to demand accountability. For instance, if we vote 10% of our national budget for defense, the National Assembly should ask the chief of the various service chiefs how these monies were spent. Not just people dressed in their military uniform and coming to say, we've bought this, we've ordered this, to the minutest details, how much got to the man, Sergeant Musa in the field, warrant officer, how much got to him based on the document you submitted.
Okay,
don't have that.
Fine. Talking about Sergeant Musa, Warrant Idris, and all of those people now, the rank and file.
The rank and file.
You think they are excited with this new change? Or they should be excited with this new change?
Well,
or what do you think should be the mood?
Well, there should be, interestingly, some of these current service chiefs have been in the front line. So some of these, they have tasted what it is, and some of the commanders in the field have know
the new chief of army staff used to be the
Hadinkai. Yes. Yeah, so they've worked with them, so they understand. And so when you hear that such people are now in influential positions to help your cause, there is this joy. But again, will it be sustained? Because what we have found historically is that they get into office, they get really excited, they take steps, they visit the formations, they encourage and motivate the troops, they go back to the office, everything just fizzles out. That should not be the case. Build the momentum, sustain the momentum from the war room to the operational field.
From the war room
to the operational field, it has to be sustained.
Well, Brian Eweka, it's always a pleasure when we have you in the studio. We've been speaking, I guess, for like 40 minutes, dissecting President Bola Tinubu's new service chiefs, and of course, the way forward. Always a pleasure having you around. Thank you so much for joining us.
To be here. Thank you.
Right. Well, Brian.